I want you to take notice of this hole in my screen. That's my face screen. That could have been my eye. Think about it. Well, through the week, I run into a lot of interesting things, and this is going to be a compilation of different things that I see. And I catch all these images because I'm always ready with my iPhone. I've got that little holster by the side of my waist there. This was an interesting little bit of footage here. These are stills. I do have a little video of this. These people had a swing that they put on the tree about 10 years ago. And as the tree grew, well, you can see what happened. The chain completely encapsulated the wood, and actually the tree absorbed the chain, and from there on out it started to die, so it became unsafe. This is kind of cool. I've got this situation where I had one of my clients call me up and say that she's clearing out the barn, and I got a lot of incredible wood. Her husband was a woodworker, and I got all this vertical grain, tight, no knot, old growth redwood siding that had been sitting up in the barn for 60 years. So as I said, a lot is happening these days. And we've got inflation, and we've got desperation, and we've got people that are doing stupid things. So I want to talk a bit about the drought. So everybody's talking about, you know, what can you do to save my trees? Well, the first thing that you've got to do is educate your gardeners to stop blowing away all the mulch. Everybody's so hung up on the word tidy. Everything's got to be tidy. Well, the trees need the mulch. As a matter of fact, add the mulch. I've got so many clients that are tearing out their front yards and putting down these plastic lawns that their trees are dying. I also want to talk about species of trees that are dying and why. Some trees need a lot of water, like the birch, and when the drought hits, all sorts of things happen. Like, see these little holes? That's from the bronze birch borer. So it's a combination of problems. Some of those holes on the side there were from sapsuckers, but this tree was dying, so I went up in the bucket and I started piecing it down, and I took it 16 inches at a time, and I want to show you what happened. The tree had been topped in the past. Birch trees are one of the weak trees when it comes to wound decay. A small wound can lead to a large cavity. So I want to show you incrementally as I go down this trunk. I'm taking, like I said, I'm taking it off 12 inches at a time. You can see some of the old wounds down there. Here's the first one. It's still pretty decayed. That white wood on the outside is the only living tissue. The inside, that's not heartwood, that's all decay. Some of it is more solid than the rest. As it goes down through the trunk, the decay works its way into the heartwood, and it's still relatively solid, but you know, still it's pretty punky here. See the discoloration? Some people call that spalting, and it can make some really beautiful lumber. It's interesting, a lot of wood turners love this stuff because this should be white all the way through. It shouldn't have all this discoloration. That little pinpoint right there, I believe that was from an insect from a long time ago. An insect bored its way into the tree and left that little tiny bit of hollowing or decay or whatever. And on the ground, this is the accumulation of that tree. So let's move on to another tree. I'm showing this tree right here because I'm kind of reading the bark. And as you can see, the bark has kind of a swirl to it. It's interesting when I look at wood and try to decide if it's worthy of keeping. This is a maple tree, and I got to the backside and there was a big bit of decay on it. So I cut this little maple tree down. It wasn't a huge tree, but I did put a rope on there because it was leaning back a little bit and I wanted to pull it over in one solid piece. I know you guys like to see trees falling down. I admit I do too. It's kind of fun. So I put my wedge in here, I'm just using the small saw. And Jorge's pulling on it. You note that I'm using the saw upside down. And part of the reason was the location of the cut, and it was awkward for me. There's nothing wrong with cutting on the top side. However, this is something that did happen that I want to show you. I've got Jorge pulling on the rope, and he pulls just a little bit too soon. You notice it's starting to move right there? And he jammed up my saw before I was ready. So I had to indicate to him to relax. There it goes, he relaxed. I got the saw off, and then he's able to pull it over. So let's go take a look at the trunk of this tree. See what's going on inside. All that discoloration there. You saw that wound up high, and it went all the way down to the base. So the hollow of this tree had a lot of slime in there, and it stunk. It smelled like alcohol. You can see what's going on in there. I thought I might have gotten a small saw log out of this. Maybe I could have actually harvested it and got some from the outside edges, but I decided it wasn't worth it. So we just got rid of it. I don't know if you've ever seen this brush dolly that we built. I've had this for 25 years or more, 30 years, and we have 2 of them. These are custom built, and we can haul some big pieces. So let's go ahead and open up this tree and see what it looks like. This is above that wound, and you can see that there's a lot of decay on the inside of the tree. It's pretty weak all the way through, but there's still enough tissue in there to throw out a little bit of life. But the top of the tree was, I should have showed the tree beforehand. The top of the tree was totally dead. Now let's get down a little bit further to where the decay is, and I sliced that in half. If you read Shigo, he always talks about how much more information you can glean from a tree if you slice it longitudinally. It's one thing to slice it in cross cuts, but when you cut along the grain, you can see all the different areas and all the different barriers and all the different walls that wall off decay. So the center of this tree was rotting all the way through, but you could see that it still had some life surrounding this hollow. And if it wasn't for these natural walls of decay separation that a tree puts out, the trees would just rot all the way through. And this was kind of interesting. This is yet another job. I got up there and I was looking at this tree, and the woman said, can I look at it? And I said, well, yeah, if you want to. I didn't really expect her to do it, but she did. Okay, in my travels, I drive around and I see things, and once in a while I stop. This is a deodar cedar that is so infected with pitch canker. I mean, look at all that pitch oozing out of the tree. It went all the way up the trunk. And when you look down low, you can see bulges in the bark. So imagine the pitch accumulating underneath the bark until it builds up these pockets of pitch that have so much pressure that they push and crack, and then it starts pumping out on the bark. That's what's happening here. So I got back and looked at the tree from a distance, and it still looks okay, but how long will it survive? So getting back to looking at drought conditions, people plant trees that are tropical. In our area, we live in a Mediterranean climate, but with the drought going on, you know, you've got to give the trees water. Okay, let's move on. This was a job that I did. I had a deodar cedar, and I made the decision to do some pruning because it had some weaknesses. But there was also some very interesting anomalies in this tree. Rubbing branches. Look at that. There's 2 branches there that have been rubbing for a long, long time. And I got up in the tree with the bucket to do some of this work, and I want to show you some of the problems that I spotted. That is an accident waiting to happen. So I took that bottom bit off because I could see that it was planning on splitting. The tree intended for that to split off, but I got it before it did it on its own. This is really interesting. The tree absorbed an old wound that was rubbing, and it actually grafted back together and encapsulated that. So here's another area where we've got branches rubbing on each other really, really hard, and if it holds it real tight, then it can actually create a graft. Here's where there was a branch that was removed, but a decision was made not to take it off entirely because that stub is supporting the branch above it. Can you imagine cutting that all the way off and having it break? Now, I like to read trees, and when I look at branches that have a unusual bend to them or a curve down, I look at them closely and I think, okay, is there a lot of weight on the end associated with somebody cutting off the terminal buds? And you can see what happens when you cut off the terminal buds of these long branches all the way around. It creates multitudes of branches, tip branches, almost like a witch's broom effect on the end. And all of those little branches create an additional amount of cones and also more weight, more end weight. So a lot of times the pruning causes the failures. So what killed my tree? It was a coral bark Japanese maple that the client planted 6 years ago, and I told her I would dig it out. And when you look at a tree that's died, if you can figure out what killed it, then maybe you can make some corrective replanting decisions for the next step. So this tree is not too big, but 6 years it grew about 12 feet tall or so. But it's naturally a slow-growing tree. What's interesting is this circle right here with this brick enclosure housed a fairly large live oak. And I used to work on it years and years ago. It was as big as this one over here. It had a trunk that was probably 5 feet in diameter within this confine. So they built this raised brick enclosure around it a long time ago, 50, 60 years ago. And over time, I remember watching this tree decline. It had all kinds of problems. It was hollow. Somebody actually put a drain tube in it. It was about a 1/2-inch drain tube to drain out the water from the cavity that was in it. Later found out that we've all found out that that is incorrect. But so what I'm looking at here, let's play detective work. The first thing I can see is, let's look at the trunk. Okay, I can see some cracking in the trunk and some drying out. Now, did that happen before the tree died, or is that secondary? Well, it's kind of hard to tell. But if I peel some of the bark off, I think I'll see some discoloration in the wood. So this tree has been dead now for, it did not leaf out. That's the issue. It leafed out last summer, so it's been dead probably for 5 or 6 months. So I'm going to dig this thing out and see if I can find any fungus or problems in the soil. Here's my educated guess. Because there was a large stump in here, and it's important to remember that this stump was all wood. The entirety of this area was wood. And the tree stump did not come out of the ground. It broke off at the base. So they hired somebody to come in here and grind this stump out. I didn't do the job. They grind the stump out so that they could plant in here. So how deep did they grind? Well, for one, the fact that it's an raised planter means that they probably didn't really have good access for a big machine. So it was a smaller machine. So I'm guessing they only ground down, this is a total guess, but 12 inches or so, and then planted the tree on top of the wood. Now, what would that do to the tree? Would the tree continue to live until the roots got down into the decomposing material down below? Did that cause the problem? Was it a buildup of water that couldn't percolate through the old wood underneath? So it built up some root rot at that impermeable layer? That's a pretty good guess. I won't know until I dig it out and see what's going on. Oh, a bunch of hummingbirds there. Now notice I did not cut the tree down before I started digging this out, because if you cut it down, you lose all that leverage. And interestingly, there is a little bit of movement in the soil. I started cutting over here, but this is the way it was. So in 6 years' time, I think that should be rooted a little bit better than that. Look at how much movement there is in that trunk. So keep digging. So I'm digging out the roots, and they're still reasonably solid, but you see that white strand just underneath the root bark? That is a fungal organism that is going through the root system. Exactly which one it is hard to say, because I'd have to send it to a lab unless I find indicators like mushrooms or something that says, that's Armillaria malea, oak root fungus. But I think because I know there was a huge stump underneath this, and there's a huge amount of wood in the ground here, I know that wood is decomposing, and fungal organisms that build up as it decomposes wood can have an adverse effect on root development of new living trees. Okay, I'm getting there. A whole lot more wiggle to it now. I think if I get Jorge to give me a hand, two of us can just break that out of the ground and pull that whole stump out. So if you look closely here, you can see those little white strands in the middle. That, I'm guessing Armillaria. That's what I'm going to say. I'll stand by that one. If not Armillaria, some other kind of root rot that's associated with decomposing wood. So, should she plant another tree in here? That's the question. She really wants to. Should I find a tree that is resistant to Armillaria, or recommend that she continue with her flowers? Well, it's a toxic environment for planting a tree until the tree ages enough that it turns back into soil. Has 6 years been long enough? Well, that's the question. I'm not sure. Trying to see if there's any root rot in here. I don't see any down low. It's pretty moist. Oh, I can feel the old stump. Oh, yeah.
From the oak?
Yeah, there was a huge oak tree here.
So they didn't grind it down?
They didn't grind down very deep. I mean, I went down to solid wood. So I was just sitting on solid wood. All right, let me help you out.